big treat, though. I think it will be much better than the weather out there. This gentleman doesn't need a lot of introduction for most of you here, but for those of you who don't know Brent Colley, he is a longtime friend of the Mark Twain Library. He comes here and speaks frequently about the history of Reading. He grew up in Reading. His family is 5th generation in Reading, and so he has a deep interest in our history. He started a website back in 1998, and the history of Reading is on that website, so you can learn a great deal from that too. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brent. He's going to share with us about Mark Twain and his relationship with Russia. Thank you for coming.
Top is, thank you for being here. I realize the weather is outside, so to have this many people here, I know is quite special for me. As I hit Danbury, it was 68 degrees. I thought for sure the bitch was going to be playing tennis, but this library is near and dear to my heart. I've been here since I was a little kid, probably since I was 3 years old. I like to show people this every time I come here. This is my library card from 1994, or 84 rather. I couldn't find it. I looked everywhere. I turned my house upside down because I knew I still had it. But then I also knew that I had to talk about the Innocents Abroad, which was when Mark Twain went to Russia, and I put it in here as a bookmark. So I knew I had the right topic for today. I'd also like to dedicate this talk to my friends, Susan, you're here, Heather Morgan, who was the former executive director here at the library, myself. We're in a Mark Twain anniversary year right now. Obviously, he passed away in 1910. He arrived here in 1908. So we call ourselves the Twainiacs, Twain Maniac, Twainiac. And we drove our wives and husbands mad as we promoted his time here, because we knew how special what we have here with this library and also with his time here in Reading truly is. So we set out on a mission to connect as many communities, towns, and states and countries with his time here about a decade and a half ago. And Susan did some nice artwork that showcased everything that happened when Mark Twain was here. When we were growing up, a lot of Mark Twain's time here was just that, he was here for a couple of years and then he died. And that was it. But when we discovered that that wasn't really truly the case, and that's kind of why we're doing what we do today. It was much more than that. I look at history in terms of loops, and a lot of historic loops closed in Reading. And Reading truly is a very important place involved in his life, and he truly loved it here. And so, that being said, I dedicate it to Heather Morgan. And the reason why we have the Russian books is because of her. So in 2002, Heather was getting started here as a new director. She was going through what she had to work with. And in the basement of the building below, she found a box full of Russian translated books. And she didn't really know what they were, but they looked really interesting. And having a lot more to do, she threw them aside by the cupboard and said she would come back to them. 2002, the other neat thing that I just realized this morning when I was having my coffee preparing again for this, was that 2002 is about when I started getting contacted about Mark Twain's time in Reading. Ken Burns had done a documentary about his life, and unlike many others, he included Reading. So with my historyofreading.net website, I had stuff on Mark Twain, and people said, well, I want to know more about Mark Twain. Now, growing up from the 70s till then, I told him what I had been told. Well, he just, came here for a couple of years, and then he died. He said, there's got to be more than that, Brent. And I decided, all right, I'm going to work on this. So we started work on this from that point forward, which is kind of a neat tie-in to today. Really tie-in, this is an example of one of the books that Heather came across. And the individual who wrote this book, Henderson, wrote this in 1910. It was one of the earlier books about Mark Twain. And in the introduction, as he was writing this book, Leo Tolstoy from Russia had passed away. And he made note of both Twain and Tolstoy, and I'll get to why that's important next. So Heather and I did this together up at Boston University, and so she was telling everyone about how this all came about. So she found the books, and then she found the newspaper clippings that talked about this gentleman, Bradley Kelley. This is an example of what these clippings were. They told the story of Mr. Kelley, who was the president of the Mark Twain Library, but also a member of Royal Syndicate, who brought in a lot of cartoonists to town. Reading was a big draw for cartoonists, Hal Foster and many others. So he had basically decided that he was going to tell the story of Twain and try to work in a relationship with Russia. So Mark Twain was a bridge between Russia and America. And then now Heather, knowing this, had her answer. She knew what the books were all about. So then it was the job to bring it all together and catalog it and then bring it to the public's eye. So the books that were available here at the library were cataloged. At that point in time, we were updating the website, so now we had a view of all the books here at the library that could be viewed by anyone who had a connection to the internet. And these are the titles that were here and still are in this library. So they had 8 titles, 2 from Russia, 8 from Russia and 2 from the Ukrainians. And these are the different versions of those. And one of my favorites, obviously, is The Prince and the Pauper, because no matter what language it's in, you can obviously know what it's all about. But it is neat to have these in our collections. And what's even neater is the fact that these were signed over to our town, our library, from the Lenin Library in Moscow, and this comes in December 10th of 1960, which is a point in time of relationships between the USSR and America that weren't tight. So it was a really interesting thing. The other thing is Harold Foster's wife, Helen, was the president at this time period. So with this is really when there was an outreach. There's a Mark Twain forum online. You get a lot of emails about Mark Twain. A lot of questions are asked and answered. And a gentleman from Boston University reached out in May of 2010 to papers, ideas for their symposium on Tolstoy and Twain. Well, I thought back to the book about Tolstoy and Twain, and I thought this would be perfect. So I reached out to Heather. And I said, what do you think? We'll go to Boston University, we'll put together a presentation, and we'll talk about Mark Twain's connection to Russia, the books that we have, and just like she always did, she thought it was fantastic. So that was how this presentation all got started. How we began was talking about Bradley Kelley. So here is Bradley Kelley with the books from Russia with Helen Foster. And they're in the same room that we are. Obviously a different photograph on the back of the wall here. But he is sharing with her the books that he brought back from a tour that he made. So Brad Kelley's project was to celebrate the 125th anniversary of Mark Twain's birth, the 50th anniversary of Mark Twain's passing, and the 9th anniversary of his marriage to Olivia Lenin. And he would do this by using Mark Twain as an ambassador of goodwill to the Soviet Union. He believed that he could use Mark Twain as the ambassador, and he wanted the Americans and the Russian libraries to trade materials together in order to make this happen. So we can at least show the Russians that we agree with them on one subject, and that one subject being Mark Twain. His quest began by circulating this very we call it a magazine in the present day, but this was the newspaper in Reading at that time period. It's called the Reading Times, and they focused a lot on Reading. This particular drawing is met right now at the Reading Historical Society. He looks out a window, or at least he did last time I was there. It is from a crayon drawing from Dwayne Haley, And it came from William Ireland Starr, a resident who lived on Lee Lane in Reading here in that time period. So what Brad did was he reached out through these magazines and he sent them to countries all across Europe and into Russia. Yugoslavia was the first country to respond very positively. Everyone was excited about Mark Twain. Everyone in Europe and in these areas obviously loved Mark Twain because he was a person who spoke for what they called the little man, the common man. But the biggest one came from Russia. And this is from the Committee of Cultural Relations with Foreign Countries. And this is a relationship that he would forge with this gentleman, that he said, I fully agree with you that cultural communications between people of different countries is one of the surest mediums of maintaining peace. Twain is immensely popular among Soviet people. His works have been published and republished here in large editions. And this is really the thing that blew Brad Kelley and his wife away, was realization of how big that truly was. And that's really what stands out to me as well. It's beyond belief. So they go back and forth, and it's decided that the Kellys are going to expand the trip they're going to take to Ireland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and now it was going to include the Soviet Union. They were interviewed in every country that they went to. She was a merchandiser with Town and Country, specializing in hats. And he was, obviously a man that was very interested in Mark Twain, and people there were interested in both topics. And he reported back to America, all over Europe, all over Scandinavia, found a love for Mark Twain as a promoter of the little man. We also found, which was surprising to him, was that Mark Twain was by far Russia's favorite author. He surpassed Hemingway, Faulkner, Jack London, and Russian scholars in writing to him and speaking with him informed him that there was hardly a schoolboy or girl that hadn't read Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, or a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, illustrated by Dan Beard, who obviously wrote a doctor here in town. Also very cool to me as the geek historian I am. The highlight of his trip was an afternoon in Moscow's Lenin Library, where they found a catalog of files on Mark Twain's work 8 inches, which is pretty crazy. He was told at that time, between books, pamphlets, and articles, Twain's titles equaled 11 million copies and had been translated into 25 different Russian languages. That's across the country, which is an enormous amount. Also, he was blown away by how many people were within these libraries. The library had close to 220 million books. It's open 7 days a week, from 9 to 11 p.m. and sees 7,000 visitors a day. And while they were there, they obviously exchanged volumes, but more was soon to come. The findings of the Kellys were very surprising to Americans. They were blown away by the amount of languages they were in, as well as the amount of volumes that had been translated. The amount translated into Russian surpassed the amounts in England and America, which really speaks a large volume there. The Russians, it wasn't a government policy that made Twain in favor of Russia. They consider him the voice of the man, as I said, as a young man. They felt that Mark Twain's satire spoke truth about what America truly was. They liked the fact that he wasn't afraid to, poke his politicians when it was necessary, and to tell people, truly what was going on here in America. Obviously, Huckleberry Finn, a good example of that, where he's taking pretty much a mirror on society and going, do you see what you're doing? Do you see what you did? Do you see how wrong it is? And they really, understood that, and they liked that about him. This is a really nice letter from Russia that really says to Mr. Kelley that they deeply appreciate his kindness and his activities in exchange. They would also let you know that you've been published in Vestia, which is the front page of a Sunday issue, which is the newspaper that is one of the two biggest ones in their country, which is big. And he notes at the end, good seeds make a rich harvest. Let us hope that the exchange that we have started will bring us some good results. And I wish him and his family a happy New Year. The book exchanges did continue. They would continue in America, not only here in Reading, but also at all the sites, Hartford, Elmira, Hannibal, and this would continue into the 1980s. So everyone got on board. And one of my favorite correspondences was in Hannibal, when they told the world something that I already knew. They said, Reading, a community of about 3,500 in population, is just about as steeped in Mark Twain lore as Hannibal, although Reading does not have all Twain tourist attractions like Hannibal. And that's the point of, what Susan and Heather and I have constantly been doing, and why we continue to do what we do is Reading is really significant in terms of Mark Twain. And someday, unfortunately, we'll probably be long dead. They'll figure it out. Of all these memorial sites, we were really here first. This library that you sit in right now dates back to 1911. The seeds of how it became what it is started right after Mark Twain got here in 1908. Hartford got picked back again in the 40s and 50s. Elmira really came into the studies facility that it is in the early 80s. And Hannibal was a little bit, above us, and probably started in 1912 or 1913. But, just know that, as we move forward, especially people that here that are much younger than I, this story needs to keep on being told because of the importance of Reading and Mark Twain. In addition to that, a positive note was given by Clara. This was unfortunately the year that she passed away, but she saw the value of what he was trying to accomplish and thought it was a superb idea to organize the Russians and the Americans through their authors. This is the letter itself from February of 1962 from Clara, and she wished him tremendous success in your undertaking, and I offer my heartfelt sympathy for your great plan. Now, as far as the legacy goes, Brad Kelley sadly died in 1968, but his project didn't. The exchanges went on until the 1980s, and all in all, these book exchanges resulted in a very positive impact on U.S. and Russian relations. For those that believe it to be true, Kelley's effort to pierce the Iron Curtain via Mark Twain truly did work. Kelley hoped that the book exchange would continue to grow and more people would become aware of its existence. Today, that hope and vision is why I'm here today. Now you all know about it. You'll go back and talk to other friends about it. And, from this point forward, even just with this presentation alone, it's grown over the course of time. When I first gave it with Heather in 1910, it's grown like 3 different times. So it is a topic that grows the more people you share with, because they have information that they share with you that really help to expand it. Now that being said, here are things that we've learned since the first time. We really didn't talk about these topics the first time. We were more focused on the Bradley Kelley and how we found the books and things of that nature. Mark Twain, amazing world traveler for his time period. You got to think about it, it's all ship, there's no airplanes. Obviously, you're traveling to countries that you could easily get sick and pass from. So the fact that he traveled to roughly 35 different countries is pretty amazing. And he started at a very early period. So the one I'll focus on now was his trip, his first trip really, with the Innocents Abroad. I noted the Innocents Abroad. On this trip, he was a reporter for a group of roughly 65 individuals from America that were going to travel into Europe and the Holy Lands and eventually hit Russia and see all the different countries there and you know, live all the cultures. And his job was really to report that all back. In that time period, he was a newspaper reporter as well as a writer. So as you can see up top, Odessa is where they're going. In the book itself, he's pretty nervous because he's going to Russia. He's lost his passport, and he took his roommates. But he's thinking the worst. You know, he's going to get there and they're going to either hang him or send him to Siberia. And you know, that doesn't, thank God, end up being the case. Really and truly, all that they needed was the flag on top of the ship, which was the US of A. And so a shipload of them arrive in Russia. They're welcomed. This is the first organized group of Americans to touch Russian soil, which is pretty significant. He's there to not only write about it, but in the process of getting there, because he's more well known than pretty much anyone on the ship, they appoint him to address the Tsar. So Tsar Alexander is going to be addressed by Mark Twain, which I'm sure he ate up because that's just who he was. And really, within that speech, he's thanking Russia for their support in the Civil War, but he's also thanking Alexander for his work. He was regarded as the Abraham Lincoln of Russia. He was the one who created the documents that freed the serfs. And so he was thanking him for that. Yes, sir.
What year was that?
That was in 1867.
Yeah, they freed their serfs before we freed our slaves.
Right, so he wanted to make note of that, but then, like, you know, being typical Mark Twain, later on he notes that, you know, he wished he could have taken his jacket, because, you know, when he meets people of that stature, he wants something to remember them by. So they had a very, you know, very positive trip there. He would write in the memoirs and in the book about how he felt as if he wasn't really in Russia at all. He felt like it was just like America. You know, looking at one end of the street to the next, it felt just as normal as being in a new American city that you had not seen before. So it was a very positive trip in that regard, but even better. On that trip, he became friends with Charles Langdon. Now, Charles Langdon was the brother of Olivia. Olivia would become his wife. So within the cruise, or whatever you want to call it, the adventure, Charles shows him a locket of his sister, and then Samuel Clemens falls deeply in love with the locket, and he has to meet her. Now, you know, the Langdons are pretty much the coal barons of the whole Elmira area, and very wealthy, and they were well above Mark Twain's pay grade and stature. So there was Charlie's thinking, there's no way you're going to see my sister because you're not my sister's material. But he was adamant that he would get to see Olivia. So through this whole trip, he finds a way, because just that's how he is, to actually meet her. And he was supposed to go there for a short trip to their homestead, but within it, he falls ill. He gets hurt, and he plays it up. So this picture is Olivia tending to him because he's so hurt, and then you have Charles going, "Oh, geez, what are you doing?" and it would work. And it's a long story, but you know, definitely do look up their courtships and their relationship, their love letters, because really he woos her with his letters, and he has a little bit of help from a preacher in Hartford, but. You know, this, all because of that trip, plays into what would ultimately change his entire life. And it gave him the opportunity to do what he did best, which was write, and be a man of the world, because she had the wealth to allow that. So that was a kind of neat tie-in with Russia, that within this trip, he meets her as well. The other thing that I came across, which is interesting, because obviously in the past decade, the biographies have come out, in huge volumes, very thick, large volumes, 3 now, books literally that thick. Charles Nader was the 3rd biographer of Twain. There was obviously Elder Bigelow Payne from Reading, there was Bernard DeVoto, and then there was Charles Nader. Mark Twain had some really strict rules about his autobiography, and those rules are kind of bizarre in terms that he didn't want certain information released until he knew that certain people would be completely dead, and everyone who knew them would be dead. So there was literally, if you go by the letter of the law written by him, 500 years from now is when we get the bulk of it, the end of it. 500 years. The problem was that you have people who are writing the story that really want to tell these stories that, they don't want to wait 500 years because they're not going to hear it. So what this is all about, and it's a very small book, but it's a very interesting read, is that Charles Nader puts forth his autobiography of Mark Twain, and a gentleman from Russia calls him out because he feels as if he didn't put in stuff that Mark Twain, A, would want, or he censored out stuff that he should put in. Now, it's a lot more complex than it looks from the outside looking in, because Mark Twain's work is not only his rules, but also his daughter is still alive. So this is in 1959, 1960. So Clara is still the one who's making sure that her father's rules are followed. So he really, to Nader's credit, he was doing that correctly. However, he was putting it in chronological order, which Mark Twain did not want. He had dictated a lot of his autobiography, and he wanted it just kind of like given to the world randomly, and I mean randomly. So this whole exchange between the Russians and the biographer Twain go back and forth, but in this time period that never happened. So letters are being published in Russia in the largest publications, they're literary gazettes, and people are talking about Twain from across the oceans, which is really neat in that time period. And so I just wanted to point out that this is something that came out. So this would be his version of the autobiography, including chapters now published for the first time. That was the thing. People were getting information that was not available before. So just to give you a kind of a rundown, as I said, through Premier Khrushchev's intervention, Nader's reply was published in full in the Literary Gazette, and he thus became the first American writer to be given an opportunity to air his views uncensored in a Soviet publication. So that's pretty neat. And then this book presents the text of the exchange of letters which made front-page news throughout the country. It contained also a long rejoinder to Nader's letter and a final letter which was not printed. So I'm going to donate this to the library today, so that any of you would like to read it can read it as well. I have several copies. So. The other neat thing to remember is that this library itself was influenced by the generosity of Russians, and by that I mean when Mark Twain was looking to create this library, he had a lot of different ways to obtain funds to make a reality at some point in time. One of them was taxing males, not females. We were the unimportant ones, so we made a tax for luggage for anyone who visited here. And believe it or not, like hundreds, if not, I think 180, 200 people a year visited Twain. So that was a lot of money being generated. But the biggest fundraiser was a concert that was held up on Stormfield, which would have been at the top of this hill here. And people from all over came to attend to hear not only his daughter Clara, but her friend David Bisham and her boyfriend, Russian Osip Gavrilowitz. So that was on October 6th, 1909. Excuse me, that was in September. It was announced at that time after the fundraiser that they would be married. I think that was probably around September 25th, and they were married on October 6th. So it was a shotgun wedding for sure. But the couple had known each other for much longer than that. This is a picture of the two. He was a Russian-born pianist, child prodigy. He was one of 3 sons, married to a Jewish lawyer that lived in Russia. When Russia had troubles moved to Germany and took on a more German version of their name. They had the couple, Clara and Asa, had met in Vienna when she was taking courses there. And they would be married into his death in 1936. I believe that I want to say that he was 20 and she was 24, but I may have flipped that because I'm dyslexic. About him, born in St. Petersburg, studied in St. Petersburg Conservatory, and it was when they were studying Vienna together in 1898 is when they first met. And that was during Mark Twain's world tour, where he was making back all the losses that he had, the mistakes he had made, I guess, a decade before. And that's unfortunate. This is a photo of Ossip with this is Jean Clemens' dog, a German Shepherd, right there at Stormfield. This is them, their wedding. You can see they're down here, the people right here is Mark Twain, as they get into their automobile. And this is their wedding photo. You're supposed to dress down for your daughter's wedding. Mark Twain didn't go that way. He's wearing the gown that he got in Oxford when he was honored with the honorary degree. As far as Ossip and Mark Twain's relationship, Ossip truly envied Mark Twain, and I think the feeling was mutual. He really, really held Twain in high regard. And I think the best indication of that is that when he had passed away, Ossip died of cancer. He had stomach cancer in 1935, died a year later. And Clara had a special monument made for both him and Mark Twain together. So it's Mark Twain and Ossip together forever. And that grave is in Elmira. The neat thing, so when we were doing this whole, we were trying to connect Twain to all these different towns and cities across Connecticut, because they had done that with Lincoln. It was, they were trying to find, so they found all these things in Illinois for Lincoln. I think they found 8 sites. We found like 56. All connected to Twain, and the coolest one was where I am now in Sharon. So Frank Sprague is the reason why you have elevators and underground railroads and trolley cars and electricity. He was an amazing inventor that no one ever really knows about, because in that point in time, all these inventions were being bought out by, like the elevator, Otis elevator, that was him. Westinghouse bought out some of his inventions, as well as Edison. So these are people that you never would know about that were responsible for the reason why we have modern cities and a lot of other things. But Frank had married Harriet, his wife, and she was friends with Mark Twain in Sharon. Their house is still there. And apparently at the wedding, I guess, when you have a shotgun wedding, you forget stuff. No one had a camera. But Frank Sprague had one in his car. So that's why this is one of the only photos we've seen of the wedding, and it was made by Frank J. Sprague. So yeah, definitely Google Frank J. Sprague. He's definitely a neat individual in terms of electrical history. But that was kind of cool. We had so much fun when we were doing that, connecting different towns to it. And there's a couple here just before the talk started about Easton, and obviously Helen Keller, Mark Twain and Helen Keller were great friends, and there's so many of those connections all over the state. The second one was that, amazingly enough, Clara married not just one Russian, but 2. They were both musicians, and Jacques Samosad, had portrayed himself as this great conductor, this worldwide conductor. She was 70, he was 50. And unfortunately, the biggest thing that he conducted was financial loss. But I can see why she may have been attracted to him, because her father was that way too. Mark Twain made a lot of bad decisions, and he gambled on a lot of different things that he probably shouldn't have, but he was always looking to get better. side by side, eventually gambled to the point where they were $500,000 in debt. And she had to auction off the house and a lot of Mark Twain manuscripts just to get them to a motel where they would live in 2 motels the rest of their lives. So it's kind of sad, but kind of ironic all at the same time of that connection and how similar he was to her father. So that was kind of a neat pickup that I'm still kind of wading through in terms of information as to what that was all about. And she seemed happy, and there was a lot of information about that time period. She sadly passed in 1962. To kind of double back a bit, Ossip and Clara did have a child. It was the only grandchild of Mark Twain. That was Nina. Nina was born here in Stormfield, and Mark Twain unfortunately never got to know that she was pregnant, or we don't know whether he knew or not. But the only grandchild of Mark Twain was born and bred too, so that's another kind of neat thing that we discover over the course of time. But she didn't live a very happy life either. So there's a lot of sadness in Mark Twain's life, and I think that's kind of where a lot of us connect with him. Life isn't always happy. It's a balance. And he took the good with the bad, and he battled through a lot. And that's really why a lot of us we connect more with his life and his thoughts about life and his explanations about life and life topics than his works themselves. So he's very complex and but very knowledgeable on a lot of different topics just because of those things. The other thing that came up was this guy. So this guy is from Connecticut, Ken Richters. So he is a Mark Twain impersonator. He had been so for over 30 years. And he gets connected by the State Department through Hillary Clinton to travel to Russia as Mark Twain and follow his footsteps in Innocents Abroad. Now, it's a funny book. It's not as funny as they say on Amazon, but there are some gems within it. And the funniest thing for me was the fact that he didn't really know what to make of this early on. So he's invited to go become Mark Twain. In what would be the Ukraine at that point in time on a goodwill tour. But he's been in the business a long time. He's made fun of a lot of politicians. So in the back of his mind, he's thinking they're going to take me out. Why would they're going to send me to Russia? So the State Department, the quarterback really gets it because you can tell that was truly the case. The U.S. State Department, Bureau of International Programs. I'm trying to reach Ken Richters about a possible program in Moscow on the auspices of the Department of the State. I have phoned him twice at home, but I haven't received a response. He may be touring. In any case, would you please have him call me at the earliest opportunity? So he's actually trying to keep away from these guys because he's trying to figure out what's going on. But the book is kind of interesting in how difficult it is to navigate a foreign country in terms of exchange rates and customs, and between Russia and Ukraine, the languages are similar but different. But the also interesting thing is all the things he shares about what it's like to be there. But also, what's really cool is that in the present day, Mark Twain is just as popular as it was back then, because he has to extend his program, what he thought was just going to be like a week or two, across a month. And then he was invited to actually even teach Mark Twain scholarship at the local, or the Russian Moscow University. So it proves that time has not turned them deaf to Mark Twain. He truly is just as popular now as he was then. These are the notes of who he thinks may be outskill him. He says that over his career there's been 7 senators, 15 past presidents, 26 governors, countless, So he's really, concerned about disappearing at this point in time. And this just kind of runs down how a big hit Mark Twain is. Originally scheduled as a weekend cultural exchange. The tour extended to 3 weeks because so many Russians wanted to meet Mark Twain, so he's going all over the country. And it says Richter's time is in such high demand, his entire stay has already been booked. additional performances have been scheduled, and he's presenting master's classes at Moscow State University. So that is, pretty cool. So 50 years after Mark Twain's death, there's a dream to build a cultural exchange between the United States and Russia. 100 years after Mark Twain's death, that story's been brought back to the surface, and now 110 years after his death, once again, we tell it, and I think, that's how we keep history alive, and that's truly why I do what I do. So this is my standard Mark Twain slide at the end when I come here. Someone please have a whiskey? Yeah, no whiskey. And obviously, thank you for coming here on a beautiful day like today, but any questions you have, I'm here for you.
Comes to settle upon this land, the library is now situated.
So a gentleman named Adams lived here, and the story is that Mark Twain talked him into donating the land to the library. One of Mark Twain's final actions was to tell his lawyer they want to set aside at least $6,000 for the start of the creation of the library. And then to their credit, the town of Reading did what he asked within a year. So he passed away in April of 2010. We have this by 1911, so not too bad.
And Theodore Adams, he lived right getting on Great Pasture Road and 53, so he lived right where the Flyers
Where Sally lives now?
Yes, that's
Okay.
good.
I'd encourage everybody to read the War Prayer that Twain wrote in 1905. I just read a little piece about it, and it was not published until 13 years after he died because his editors thought it was unseemly, but you should read it. It takes you a minute to read it, and it's so apropos of, it doesn't go out of style.
No, it's powerful. You can find it on YouTube too.
Yeah.
I forget the actor that did it, but there's one that's really solid.
It's, because we have war hysteria right now, and it's the same. He was in the Anti-Imperialist League.
Yep.
He was the vice president.
Yep.
So the same crap's still going on.
Yeah, no, he's totally against it.
Except it's more dangerous now because the media is so. It's
But
so
he was ahead of the
black.
time, yeah, but if you read his stuff, he was ahead of the time. He actually pretty much got silenced. Once he got into that mode, the media took him out. They bought the rights to his words, and then they could take out the words or not publish them. So after 1905 and on, a lot of his works went silent.
Yeah. Anyway, read it.
Definitely. Yes, sir.
I also urge people, even if they read it before, to read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I read it I tried to read it about 6 months ago, and the spelling was so odd that I found it hard to understand some of the words. So I listened to a CD, which was, as you know, better than anybody, the different dialects that are written into the book are very important, like the Missouri Negro dialect, or the Pike County, the backwoods dialect. You hear that when you listen to the audio.
Yeah.
But it makes a big difference which narrator you listen to. I've listened to a couple of them. The very best, in my opinion, is Norman Dietz, D-I-E-T-Z.
Okay.
He has an incredible way of talking with it. You swear that he's black. He's white. He's a white person, but when Jim talks, you swear that he's black. When Huck Finn's aunts talk, you swear that he's a woman. He's a ventriloquist, I guess. And so it really brings alive all these different dialects in a way that I could never appreciate if I read the book.
Dietz.
Dietz. So remember that, Dietz. I don't know if it's in this particular library or not, but they made that like over half a dozen different audio versions, maybe even 12, I think, maybe a dozen audio recordings of Huck Finn. But this one, the voice of the narrator makes all the difference in the world. Because I guess some white, I don't know, I'm guessing narrators I feel awkward about putting on a strong Missouri Negro accent because they might be accused of cultural appropriation, or I'm not sure what.
Right.
But that enriches this book tremendously when this narrator indulges in these dialects. Have you, you don't know if you're familiar with that particular?
No, I'm more of his life, I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah.
I was just curious about further background on his international travels, and I happened to be in Hawaii last summer, and they had a small copy of Roughing It at the front desk, so I grabbed it and read it. I've never read The Innocents Abroad, but that was a travelogue he wrote when he was a San Francisco reporter, might have been the Chronicle, I'm not sure which newspaper. And he spent about a month and a half over there, and it's an utterly extraordinary little book because you know, today you probably get a ride up to look at the craters of Hawaii. Back then they hiked up the 10,000-foot mountain and then they hiked into the crater, and there's just an unbelievable episode where he convinces a guide to run across the hot lava in hopes of getting to a lake of lava. And the other guides are saying, you may not make it back. And they say, that's okay, just hang a lantern. We'll find our way back. And of course, once they're in the middle of all the orange glow, there's no finding the lantern glow anymore. And so they're taking a wild guess as to which way is the right way back. But it got me thinking in terms of listening to your talk and the international travel, so the degree to which international travel would have informed his later writings. I didn't know if that was something. And obviously in Hawaii, that was as big of a melange of worldwide culture you could ever find between, you know, Japanese, Chinese, Russians, Americans, who knows who else was there, obviously the natives. But is that something that cropped up time and time again in his writing?
I mean, I think the fact that he grew up in Missouri in the middle of the United States and saw so many people along the Mississippi River, that he saw more people than most would. But then, like you said, he traveled so many different places that he knew so many different more people than anyone else could possibly know. So I think it had a big influence on his characters and his stories, just because of that. And he was just really good about, you know, painting a picture of wherever he was.
That was the striking thing of Roughing It, is, you know, having been in Hawaii, I'd never been there, and then to just see him describe what I was looking at, and it definitely infused it with a new understanding, even though it was 150 years later.
Yeah. No, my favorite part of that, when he left there, he wasn't doing too well health-wise, and a ship had gone down in the Pacific that had gotten to Hawaii. It was called the Hornet. And he actually, he went from Hawaii back to California, took notes from everyone who was capable of giving him information about what had happened, not only in their troubles, but their way back and how he found Hawaii. That was one of his most interesting articles, just because he put in that time. And I think those two brothers were from Stanford. That was another one of our connections when we were doing that. But yeah, no, he definitely could really tell the story that what you there, and present day you can see it now.
I know Twain mentioned Bridgeport. You talk about connections to towns, and I know you mentioned Bridgeport in Connecticut Yankee. Do you know of any?
P.T. Barnum. So he had a strange.
Yeah, they weren't getting that along.
They got along, but they had like if you look at their letters back and forth, it's really hilarious.
But they did write.
They went back and forth, yeah.
Huh.
And it's good stuff.
Is it?
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, they were definitely breaking each other's stones.
Where could we find that? Where could we find that?
So you can find online. So the Mark Twain Project, which you can find through the University of Berkeley. Just search on the letters from the individuals, and you can. It's amazing. It's kind of scary. Like, can you imagine if every letter or email that you sent to somebody was available for the future? But that's kind of the way it is. Like, you know, replies to certain, so you can search on individuals and read their letters back and forth. But yeah, no, it's good stuff. But yeah, they're pretty much pen pals, I guess. That's what I put it.
Yeah, I never read that. I thought they would keep kind of one ignored the other, but that's cool.
Yeah, definitely read it. They're fun. Yes.
Was there ever an attempt to create a tourist attraction in writing related to Twain?
Yeah, we tried everything. We're just we almost lost our husbands and wives, like I said. They're like, why are you doing this? I'm like, I don't know. Like, precious, someone's going to care. Yeah, no, it's really bizarre. Susan put together a whole tour, and it never really took root. Maybe that's just the way it's supposed to be. I don't know. But no, they really, you know, there were sites, you know, things tend to go away. But we had a great group of people who own houses. You know, Jake, he was great. He was showing Stormfield. I think Erica wanted to kill us by the end. But people really wanted to see, Twain's writing, and we still had places that we could go and show them. And Mark Twain Lane was Susan's, and the Lobster Bar, which was the original. And so, yeah, but I mean, as far as like, high-end tourists, I don't think we want that in writing, but, like I said, never took a
They had that map that we did, for the library, of all the sites. I think they're selling it downstairs again.
Okay.
All the sites, the main train sites. Includes Jen Ostrom. She lives in Roman's house, who was the first director of the library. And actually, the first library, when they started this, was right on Uncle Long Road. There's a chapel, Uncle Long Chapel, and it's still there.
It's a house.
Yeah, and you can still see it's a chapel. If you come up Diamond Hill Road and you hit Uncle Long, right on the right, you'll see the chapel faces east. You'll see it's an old church, and that's where the first library was.
So it's a house that faces the Uncle Log Cemetery. Kind of cool.
Did you ever learn why Mark Twain moved to Reading?
Albert Bigelow Payne would probably be the best credit for that. He had spoke to him down in New York about, the autobiography, and so he thought that if they got away from the hustle and bustle of New York City, that they could spend more time together and take better notes together. And I don't think Mark Twain initially thought he was going to be here full time, but when he got here, he, like everyone else, fell in love with it, and then he didn't want to leave, which is really interesting. But yeah, no, because Susan's house on Mark Twain Lane is where he started. It was called a lobster block, where it looked like a lobster block from Maine. Albert Bigelow Payne's house was right there, so it was an easy way for them to either walk across the fields and play billiards, or do some real work. But no, he truly fell in love with the way Reading was back then, and Reading really fell in love with him. I can't imagine what it must have been like to, there wasn't many houses, if any, with lights, to see this big, huge glowing thing up top of this hill here. Because a lot of the trees were gone, so it would have stood out.
They had settling lights. There's no one else had any lighting. So there were no trees. So if you were standing outside here on 50, over here on the corner, there's a picture, and that's why I can say that, and there's no trees. So you can just see this
It would just be this big
monster
glowing,
Florentine-style mansion sitting up with no trees on the hill.
and that's how the burglars found it. So that was the other funny thing. So September 18th, he's there for a couple months, and these burglars get off the train in West Reading, and they're just coming around like, you where Mark Twain lives? And, all the big lights, and so it's pretty fun. But yeah, they learned quick not to mess with Mark Twain. I don't know how they found them, but they robbed the house at midnight, and by 7 o'clock they were bloodied on the front lawn of Lounsbury, which is just the house next to the waterfall here. And then they were arraigned at Reading Center by 9, and on a train to Bridgeport by noon.
There's a shootout.
And there was a shootout too, yeah. Yeah, they tracked him all the way to Bethel Station, and then, a whole posse was within the train trying to find out who it could possibly be. And by the time they got to West Reading, one jumped off and went behind what's now the post office, and another one had a shootout with Deputy Banks.
Yeah.
And eventually they found the guy hiding underneath the bridge, and that was that. But I mean, how he couldn't do that in present day. So yeah, there's a lot of crazy stories. Just in that church, it's just a little bit less than 2 years, but a lot of crazy things happened in that while he was here.
When I mentioned that on the lobster club, really, the name is because of the Angelfish Club.
That's true too.
That's why Ribbons had told me that.
Yeah, so
Because
Mark Twain obviously didn't have, and once his children had grown up, didn't have any grandkids. So a lot of girls from age 12 to say 15 were known as his angelfish, and basically they pretty much acted like his pseudo grandkids. And they came here and they named all the different buildings. They loved to visit. He loved to correspond with them. There's a whole book about the letters back and forth. So actually, great-grandkids of the angelfish have come to Reading and showed us all the books that they have of signatures back and forth, the letters. But yeah, that one probably ran for about a year, and maybe not even a year and a half.
Clara didn't like it.
Yeah, his daughter didn't like that idea, so I think that's a question. But no, but it is neat to, you know, kind of like imagine how much fun it must have been for that short period of time, because there's such buildup, you know, he's coming here, you know, one of Engelfish is, actually was Albert Payne's daughter, they take the train up, you know, they come to the station, there's all these people there, like, hi, Mark Twain, like, wow, and he was just blown away, and they were blown away, and then the whole parade, you know, to his house, so, in that day and time, it must have been something else.
Nobody else had electricity, like were there electrical wires that were run up? Why was it, or was it gas?
No, it was all run through coal, or something similar to coal. There may have been one up on Sunset Hill. Ludgate was up there, possibly, but that's about it. The only other one that I'm aware of is down in Georgetown, the Stone Church. They had lights through that, that coal, but that was it. Now and even like the running water was rare in that time period for him. So it would have been something, it would have been quite a sight. I'm sure a lot of people visited just because it was something they had never seen before.
Thank you.
Thank you. For having me.
Once you